In this episode, we're going to make penetration testing feel like a disciplined way to reduce uncertainty instead of a dramatic hacking stunt that only matters when someone is trying to show off. A penetration test is a structured attempt to find paths an attacker could realistically use to compromise systems. And in a payment environment, it is one of the clearest ways to validate that your defenses hold up under pressure. New learners sometimes assume that vulnerability scans and penetration tests are basically the same thing, but they answer different questions, and confusing them is a fast way to get surprised later. A scan tends to identify known weaknesses in an automated way, while a penetration test asks whether weaknesses can be chained together into real compromise, even when the path is not obvious. Segmentation adds an extra layer to this topic because many organizations rely on network boundaries to limit the exposure of sensitive systems. When you test thoughtfully and you can prove segmentation works, you replace vague confidence with evidence you can defend. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. To anchor the conversation, it helps to name the environment we are trying to protect and why segmentation even comes up in the first place. The cardholder data environment, CDE, is the collection of systems that store, process, or transmit cardholder data, plus any systems that can directly affect the security of those systems. In a typical organization, the CDE is not the entire network, and it is not meant to be, because protecting everything to the highest standard would be expensive and hard to maintain. Segmentation is the strategy of placing barriers so that systems outside the CDE cannot freely communicate with systems inside it, which reduces both risk and scope. Beginners often picture segmentation as drawing a box on a diagram, but the real question is whether the box is enforced by controls that actually block traffic. Penetration testing, combined with segmentation testing, is how you demonstrate that the boundaries are real, not just drawn. A useful way to think about penetration testing is to view it as an evidence-producing exercise, not just an activity. In a payment card industry data security standard, PCI-DSS, context, the outcome is not a thrilling story about what the tester did, but a defensible understanding of what could happen to your environment if an attacker tried common paths. A well-run test is planned, scoped, executed, and reported in a way that is repeatable and understandable. It considers the attacker's perspective while respecting safety, because the goal is to learn without causing harm to production systems. Beginners sometimes think penetration tests are unpredictable by nature, but in reality good tests are structured and deliberate, with methods that emphasize realism over chaos. When the process is sound, the results can guide improvement instead of creating fear. That is what it means for a penetration test to provide value rather than noise. Segmentation effectiveness is a specific kind of claim that often needs to be proved because it is easy to get wrong in subtle ways. An organization might believe that a firewall rule blocks access, but an overlooked route, a misconfigured device, or a permissive rule for a convenience service can create a hidden path. Segmentation is not only about blocking everything. It is about allowing only what is necessary and being able to justify every allowed path. That means the right test does not merely ask whether any connection is possible, but whether the allowed connections could be abused to reach sensitive systems. For example, a permitted management connection might allow a compromised admin workstation to reach deep into the CDE if it is not controlled carefully. Beginners often think in terms of yes or no connectivity, but attackers think in terms of what can be reached from where, using what credentials, and with what leverage. Proving segmentation effectiveness is about answering those deeper questions with evidence. Before any testing happens, scope and objectives must be clear because unclear scope is the root of many disappointing results. The scope should identify which systems are in the CDE, which systems are outside it, and which boundaries or segments are being claimed as protective. The objectives should define what you want to learn, such as whether an external attacker can reach internal systems, whether a compromised workstation could move into the CDE, or whether administrative pathways are appropriately constrained. A qualified security assessor QSA. Mindset values clarity here because the test must be tied to the environment's real architecture, not an idealized description. Beginners may assume scoping is bureaucratic, but scoping is what ensures the test answers the right questions and does not waste time on irrelevant targets. When scope and objectives are solid, the test becomes a meaningful challenge to your assumptions. That is how you avoid surprises that come from testing the wrong thing. Another essential piece is understanding the difference between external and internal perspectives, because both can be relevant and they reveal different weaknesses. External testing looks from the internet inward, focusing on what a stranger could see and exploit without initial access. Internal testing assumes an attacker already has some foothold, such as a compromised user device or a presence on a corporate network segment, and it examines how far that foothold can spread. In payment environments, internal testing is often critical for segmentation claims, because segmentation is frequently about preventing a foothold outside the CDE from becoming access inside the CDE. Beginners sometimes assume external threats are always the biggest danger, but many incidents involve attackers gaining internal access through phishing or stolen credentials and then moving laterally. A strong testing program respects both perspectives and uses them to validate that boundaries and controls hold up under realistic conditions. That balance makes the results more trustworthy. Penetration testing also depends on rules of engagement that keep the test safe and the results usable. Rules of engagement define what the tester is allowed to do, what they must avoid, what hours they can test, and what escalation path exists if they discover something actively dangerous. This is not just a legal formality. It shapes the quality of the test because it prevents the tester from accidentally causing outages or corrupting data. In a payment environment, outages can be costly and can create their own incident, so safety and control matter. Beginners sometimes imagine a penetration test as a free-for-all, but free-for-all tests often produce messy results that are hard to trust and hard to replicate. A disciplined approach encourages careful documentation, controlled exploitation, and a focus on demonstrating risk rather than maximizing disruption. When the rules support clarity, the report can tell a clean story that leadership and technical teams can act on. To prove segmentation, the test must include specific attempts to traverse the boundaries you claim exist, and those attempts must be grounded in how attackers actually move. That often means starting from a representative system outside the CDE, such as a user workstation segment, and attempting to reach systems inside the CDE through network paths, authentication paths, and administrative pathways. It also means checking whether permitted services create unintended bridges, such as shared management tools, remote support channels, or file transfer paths that cross segments. Beginners sometimes think segmentation is only a network device setting, but in practice, segmentation can be undermined by identity and access choices. If a user outside the CDE has credentials that work inside the CDE, segmentation is weaker than it looks on a diagram. Proving effectiveness means demonstrating not only that random traffic is blocked, but that realistic attacker movement is constrained. This is why segmentation proof often involves both connectivity testing and privilege pathway analysis. A major beginner misunderstanding is thinking that if a firewall blocks pings or obvious ports, segmentation is proven. Attackers rarely need simple connectivity like that if they can use allowed pathways to gain access indirectly. For example, a monitoring system might be allowed to collect data across segments, and if that monitoring system is compromised, it might provide a path into the CDE. A help desk tool might allow remote control, and if it is misused, it becomes a bridge. Even email gateways, directory services, or patch management systems can create trusted relationships across segments that matter. The point is not that these tools are bad, but that every allowed path is a potential path for abuse if it is not controlled. A meaningful segmentation test examines these allowed paths and asks what happens if the system on one side becomes compromised. That is how you avoid a false sense of safety based on blocking only the most obvious connections. The results of penetration testing are only valuable if they are explained in a way that ties actions to impact, because technical details alone can overwhelm beginners and even confuse busy leaders. A strong report shows how an issue could be exploited, what the attacker gains, and what that means for the CDE or for payment operations. It distinguishes between theoretical weaknesses and demonstrated paths, and it clarifies what assumptions were required, such as needing a specific user's credentials or access to a particular segment. Beginners sometimes interpret any finding as a catastrophe, but good reporting helps prioritize by explaining what is truly dangerous and what is merely untidy. In the segmentation context, a key outcome is whether the tester was able to move from outside the CDE into it, or to affect it in ways that matter. If the tester can show a chain that crosses the boundary, that is strong evidence the boundary is not effective. If they cannot, that is evidence supporting your segmentation claim, provided the test was designed well. Remediation and retesting are the steps that turn a penetration test from a one-time event into a security improvement cycle. If findings are recorded but not addressed, testing becomes a repeated reminder of known problems rather than a driver of progress. A disciplined program assigns owners, timelines, and validation steps for remediation, and it documents what changed and why. In segmentation, remediation might involve tightening firewall rules, redesigning administrative access pathways, isolating management systems, or removing unnecessary trust relationships. Beginners may assume remediation is always a patch, but many penetration test findings are architectural or procedural, meaning they require design changes rather than software updates. Retesting is crucial because it proves that the fix actually closes the demonstrated path, not just the symptom. When you can show the before and after difference, you create defensible evidence that the program responds to testing results. That is what it means to prove it works over time. Another important piece of proving segmentation is recognizing that environments drift, and drift is often invisible until tested. A new vendor connection is added, a firewall rule is loosened to solve a temporary problem, a new system is deployed with default settings, or a team creates a shortcut for remote support, and suddenly the segmentation boundary is different than it was last quarter. Drift happens because people are trying to keep the business running, and security controls can be altered under pressure. Regular testing, combined with disciplined change management, is how you catch drift before it becomes a breach path. Beginners often think security is about building something strong once, but mature security is about maintaining strength through constant change. Segmentation is particularly sensitive to drift because a single permissive rule can undo many careful restrictions. When you test regularly and tie testing to change triggers, you reduce the chance of discovering boundary failure only during an incident. It is also helpful to understand how penetration testing relates to other validation activities so you don't treat it as an isolated ritual. Vulnerability scanning finds known issues broadly. Configuration reviews confirm settings match standards. Monitoring confirms visibility, and penetration testing challenges the whole system to see what those issues and settings mean in practice. In a well-run program, these activities reinforce each other because scanning and monitoring can point to areas where penetration testing should focus, and penetration testing can reveal which scan findings are truly urgent. Beginners sometimes assume one activity can replace the others, but each one answers a different question. Penetration testing is strong at demonstrating real attacker paths, but it cannot guarantee that every weakness is found because time and scope are always limited. That is why the most reliable programs combine multiple methods and use them to create layered evidence. When you learn to see testing as an ecosystem, you build a more realistic and resilient security posture. Finally, the phrase proves segmentation effectiveness should make you think about evidence that stands up under scrutiny, not just verbal confidence. Evidence can include test plans that clearly state what boundaries were tested, test results that show what attempts were made, and reports that document whether boundary crossing was possible. It can also include remediation records and retest results that show improvement when issues are found. The goal is to replace soft statements like our network is segmented with hard demonstrations like the attempted paths were blocked and the reasons are understood. Beginners often feel that proof requires deep technical knowledge, but proof is primarily about clear questions and clear answers supported by observable outcomes. When you can show the boundary holds under realistic pressure, you reduce risk and you strengthen the credibility of the entire security program. That credibility matters because it supports consistent decision-making and reduces last-minute surprises. As you bring everything together, conducting penetration tests, Improving segmentation effectiveness becomes a disciplined way of validating that your environment behaves as safely as you believe it does. You start by defining the CDE accurately and by understanding that segmentation is a claim about enforced boundaries, not a diagram. You design tests with clear scope, objectives, and rules of engagement so results are safe, repeatable, and tied to real risks. You test from realistic attacker perspectives, especially internal footholds, because that is where segmentation often proves its value. You examine allowed pathways and trust relationships, because attackers exploit what is permitted rather than what is blocked. You interpret results in terms of impact and evidence, remediate with ownership and timelines, and retest to prove fixes close real paths. You account for drift by testing regularly and aligning testing with change, so boundaries remain effective over time. When you treat penetration testing and segmentation proof this way, you reduce uncertainty, improve design, and create the calm confidence that comes only from evidence.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.